Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's very nice of you to want to come hear about poetry. And thank you, Keith, for inviting me. Keith was like, we normally have like techie people do talks, but I'd like to open up this a little bit to the humanities. And I thought, there's an amazing book, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called The Two Cultures. And it was written in 1960 by a British writer and scientist named C.P. Snow. And he talks about the two cultures being the tech optimists versus the liberal arts skeptics. And until those two cultures are joined, the world's problems will never be solved. So we really need both sides of the brain working, and I know there's a fear of poetry, as is evident here with the empty seats. Every empty seat tells a story of someone who's afraid of poetry, or was taught it really terribly in school. I mean, there's only 6 of you, but I'm sure you all had poetry in school, and did any of you enjoy how it was taught? It's really sad. The truth is, poetry can be a lot of fun and funny and connect with people. And, we notice that we often want a poem to be read to when there's some major life event. Someone dies, someone gets married, someone's born, some deep emotional event makes us want to read a poem. I don't know if you felt that way, but the truth is, I think a poem a day keeps us younger. And truthfully, poems try to make order out of chaos in the world. It's done by just their line breaks or the way they look. They always look very orderly, don't they? There's a reason for that. And also, Ursula Le Guin, I don't know if any of you read her, but she's a beautiful writer, but she wrote a lot about science, and I love what she says, that science describes accurately from the outside, and poetry describes accurately from the inside, which is really an interesting idea. Both celebrate what they describe, and we need the languages of both science and poetry to save us from merely stockpiling endless information. Of course, Google, well, we all stockpile endless information, but we need both to sometimes take us out of that. So I was going to do for you today just sort of a standard poetry reading that I do, read you poems for 12 to 15 minutes and talk about them a little bit, and also talk to you specifically about how I've used Google when writing a poem. And, there's a thought that one should turn everything off when you're writing. Don't have any other distractions. Well, when I'm writing a poem, I will admit, I look at my email, I Google something, I'm all over the place. But that's the way my mind works. It works okay. I don't need to worry about that. The distractions can be helpful in the writing a poem. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read for a few minutes. Keith is going to ask me some questions, and then I'd love for you guys. Any poets in the room? Sort of, Keith, a little bit. Anybody want to ever try to write a poem in the room? Yeah, well, okay, here you go. I'm here to tell you that I write poems about nothing, pretty much. It's sort of like Seinfeld, they're poems about nothing. But one of the things we're going to talk about is, what is the meaning of the poem that, we were asked in school, which was horrifying. I mean, to me, if I was in math class and someone called on me, I wanted to die. I was okay in a poetry class, but still, the meaning in a poem is really what the reader brings the meaning to the poem. So I'm going to start with a poem called Unruly Aura. I know you guys, I'm sure you go to health food stores. Anyone go to a health food store? We're in Venice, California. Well, I go to Erewhon a lot, down where I work in West Hollywood. So I wrote this poem after a visit one day. It's called Unruly Aura. The cashier at the health food store tells me I have a beautiful aura. Wait, I tell her. If you want to see a really beautiful aura, wait until I've taken my Renew Life Ultimate Flora Probiotic. After that, my aura will knock your socks off. She smiles at me and rings me up. My money has a beautiful aura, too. My dollar bills float out of my pink wallet. The man behind me swells from the heat I generate. Each step I take brings me closer to God, the final, fabulous aura. Take my hand, I tell her, squeeze my aura. It's hungry and looking for someone to devour. So, poetry can be funny. Just to let you know that people are always sort of afraid to laugh at a poetry reading or whatever, but it's quite acceptable, actually. So she's never trusted happiness. Maybe it's something her mother said one morning as the young girl dipped her donut into a glass of milk, powdered sugar still on her lips. Her mother tells her, "Don't get used to this." So when that came to me, I was frankly terrified because honestly, I never had donuts or whole milk or anything. So, also poems everyone thinks are autobiographical, and they're not necessarily autobiographical. The reason we think that is because they're so authentic and they connect to our emotions. So when something connects to your emotions and feels so real, like you're looking into someone's mind, we think it's autobiographical. But the fact is, the feeling is true and authentic, not necessarily the circumstances. Does that make sense to you? So here's the poem that is just plain silly. But it's also poetry, writing poems, also comes from your daily activity. So as poets, we report what we see and we tell the story of what we see, right? As scientists do, poets do. And so I wrote this poem about something. Any shoplifters in the audience? Anybody ever shoplift? I mean, I would imagine, honestly, we kind of all have, even like a little lipstick or a paper clip or like, handball when we were 12. Anyway, this poem is called Shoplifting. The guard at CVS is having a conversation with himself, using his hands to punctuate answers to imaginary questions. This might be a good time to pocket the lip gloss while he's so involved in making his point. I nod at him, "How's it going?" But he's too absorbed talking to no one. At this rate, I could steal more than just the gloss. So I go for the small but expensive moisturizer, the one they usually keep locked up behind the glass. I wonder if it's less greasy than what I use at home. Wonder if it would make my skin more dewy and youthful. The guard loves whomever he's not really talking to. I grab the cream, stick it in my purse. I have money, but I want some excitement. Haven't stolen anything since junior high. My heart doesn't race like it did back then, not getting that energy high, rosy-cheeked thrill. Maybe I should up the stakes and try stealing something that cannot be concealed. What about that pink chaise lounge? I check for a sensor. Nothing. Not even a price tag. This is my moment. I walk past the guard, still entranced with the voices in his head. I'm embarrassed to say it was easy. I often wonder about the guard when I lie in my chair in my backyard, where I've confined myself for the rest of my life, my skin glowing. So good, I'm glad you laughed. See, poems can be funny. And people will ask, I've been on this little book tour, poetry tour, did you really steal at Shay's Lounge? So that's the thing. They think, like if you write murder mysteries and 12 men are dead, that people don't say, did you really kill those 12 men in that way? So poets are always accused of, that was real. So also, so we've seen how humor is used in poems. And that basically is about nothing, even though it's about shoplifting. But I made it up. I have to go to CVS every other day like we all do, and it just gets really boring, right? So also, poems about nothing. Here's the poem about nothing I happen to like a lot. It's called In the Moment. Also, a poem takes a moment that maybe we don't think about and we expand it. And I come from New York City. I didn't learn how to drive until I was 25, and it's not my favorite thing to do, particularly parking. So this happened, and I wrote a poem, In the Moment. I just parallel parked exactly right for the first time ever. Maybe because I wasn't imagining a tsunami killing me on Sunday in Laguna, or thinking about my mother alone at home, or when I dropped the puppy off the patio. She was fine. I never recovered. Today, windows down, no radio, just sky, steering wheel, and my hands were one. And backing into the space, feeling my tires hug the curb, was a clean slide into home. That rare fit of perfection was upon me. And let me say right now, I didn't waste it. So that's truly a poem about nothing. The other, just to give you ideas, if you really do want to try to write, I always have a little notebook with me in the car, in my pocket, in my purse, wherever, because ideas come. And of course, you guys have your trusty phones and those lovely notes things. You can dictate into it too. But I get a lot of ideas for poems when I listen to the news as I'm driving. They're prompts. I don't know if you know what a prompt is, but a prompt is something that gives you an idea for a poem. It can be a title. It can be a line like, I remember. And then you just blast for 5 or 10 minutes. You don't lift your pen. You don't lift your fingers off the computer. And you write and see what comes out. And it's extraordinary sometimes. You don't edit. You don't think about it. So I often get ideas for poems from headlines. I use them as prompts for things in the news. So you guys know who Chuck Berry was, and Chuck Barris. Do you know who he was? Well, anyway, Chuck Berry, we all know Chuck Barris produced some very popular TV shows back in the day, like The Dating Game. He was very famous for that. Well, they both died in the same week. I mean, basically a day apart. And I remember seeing the headlines that Chuck Barris was dead, and then the next day it was Chuck Berry. Whoops, there go my notes. And I just thought, this is it. Here's a poem. Berry and Barris. Chuck Berry, Chuck Barris, did they plan to die the very same week? Imagine the confusion in heaven where everyone sits around watching The Dating Game as you never can tell blasts out of every cherub's transistor. Barris running numbers, Berry stringing guitars for saints. Everyone swapping stories about one Chuck or the other, both of whom are madly in love with the same twisted angel. So I made that up, of course. You see how that goes? Well, I was going to read this poem, but it's kind of bleak. There's a lot of bleak poems in this book, sort of sad poems, but it's lunchtime, Who needs to be reminded of horrible things? Though there's a lot of really horrible things in this book. But I don't upset anybody. So, well, I will read this. This is a sort of a crowd pleaser. I also want to talk about how Google has informed my work. So you're wondering, did she make that up just because she was coming here to talk to us? Yes, I did. No, I didn't. When I'm writing a poem, I hit a wall sometimes because I don't know. Like, I can only make stuff up so long, and then I'm like, well, I need to know more about that. So, for example, I wrote a poem called "The Secret Afterlife of Bees." So this is based on something true that was very compelling, and I wanted to write a poem. But then you'll know when you listen where I may have hit a wall and where I may have moved my poem over and gone to Google and typed something in, okay? The Secret Afterlife of Bees. There's a 70-pound beehive deep inside a wall of my house. Bees flow in and out of the window, a swarm of breeze dancing throughout the day. We must get rid of them. Gas them or do it the humane way. Cut into the wall, suck them into a vacuum, release them miles away into a stranger's hive. My mother used to cover her ears with her hands when a bee buzzed by. It could go inside your brain and die, she told me when I was 5. A bee followed me down the street today. We want to come out alive, she told me. Do you know why bees die after they sting? Massive abdominal ruptures. The impact blows open their stomachs like a gunshot. In the secret afterlife of bees, there are markings on the trees. We had no idea it would kill us. No idea we were risking our lives. It's sort of a sad bee poem. So I'm writing the poem, and that's true. We had to get rid of the hive. We wanted to do the natural, humane way, blah, blah, blah. But then I wondered, why do they die after they sting? Did you know that before? So I Googled, what kills a bee after it stings? And I got massive abdominal ruptures. I thought that was fascinating. So there you go. See, science and poetry are merged. Well, so it's been a fairly lively political time these last couple of years. I know we're not supposed to do politics up here. I'm not usually a political poet, like quote political, but I can't help. It's like, my God. Oh my God. So there was, in 2017, there were 7 words that were banned for the CDC, Center for Disease Control, to use. Are you aware of that? The 7 words that were banned are fetus, transgender, science-based, evidence-based, diversity, vulnerable, did I say them all? And transgender. Those words were banned from any CDC report. So that was amazing enough. I mean, that's almost a found poem, the 7 words that were bound. Bound, that's interesting, Freudian slip. Banned and bound. Your mouth was bound from using the banned words. Anyway, so there was a poetry website that went up, and it said, write a poem using all 7 words, and we'll publish what we like. So, come on, that was like my greatest day of my life. And it took me about a month to get this right, because poems need to be read aloud, too, to hear the music and the rhythm. Anyway, they put it on the website. It was very exciting. So do you remember the words? The poem is called I Am My Own Transgender Fetus. My mother thought I was a lesbian when I came home from college wearing a flannel shirt fresh from a march across the Boston Common. The 70s, no entitlement back then, no transgender friend. We all hid inside our sleepless nights, smoking fat joints of science-based conclusions, rolling out our private stomach aches, watching evidence stack up higher than we could see. I feel so vulnerable tonight, hungry for diversity. Where is my entitlement? I am my own transgender fetus, floating in a tank with no borders, banging my soft, unformed skull into the glass ceiling, seeking any spray of light as our world rolls backward over a grassless hill of mutant crickets. Button up your collar until your mouth is invisible. All evidence-based, science-based, beautiful womb, face, lips erased. Who doesn't crave a chance to say banned words? Hear their echo like vapor stain the wall of our lives, our slurred speech aching for clarity. So, that was a lot of fun to write, that poem. Do you want some more poems, or do you want a little conversation, or what do you think? A couple more? I wrote something this morning. Maybe I'll save this, but I wanted to kind of show you my process, which can sometimes be interesting. And also, I feel like we all should be reading poetry. We all should be writing it. And I know should is a weird word, but I really feel it elevates us and our spirits. And, you know, people say, I don't like poetry. Well, it's like saying I don't like food. Because there's poetry for everyone. You know, it's like your amazing dining room here at Google. You know, to walk in there and say, I don't like food, you know, you'd be out of your mind, because if you're not into, you know, I don't know, green something, you're into something, whatever. But so I like to think that, and it's true, that there is poetry for everyone. So if you're curious about the title of my book, Sunbathing on Tyrone Power's Grave, do you know who Tyrone Power is? So Tyrone Power was a movie star in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He was like a heartthrob, a matinee idol, and he was a sword fighter. He was one of my dad's favorite actors. And when I was a little girl, on TV, the old black and white TVs, you know, the Saturday night movie or whatever, we'd watch it together. But when I moved to Los Angeles from New York and Boston, I moved in the winter, it was freezing, and here we are, you know, January, and it's beautiful. And I love graveyards. Well, I'm going to read the poem. It talks about this, but I actually used to sunbathe on Tyrone Power's grave. He has this giant marble, beautiful grave in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery where a lot of movie stars are buried. And back then in the late 70s, they didn't care about this cemetery. It was like no one watered it. It was pathetic. Now it's the big cemetery. You may know of it. They show movies there. They have movie night. It's very fancy. But in the 70s, people just let things die. You know, it was like really not a lot of urban. So the title poem from the book, Sunbathing on Tyrone Power's Grave. Hollywood forever, the same cemetery as Fay Ray, dangling like a scarf in King Kong's hand. Has-been swans, their screen days behind them, float at the mouth of the grave. Backs of my thighs burn on the stone, skin recoils, sizzles, sinks into Hamlet's words. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. He dropped dead at 44, heart attack, fake sword fighting, making a movie in Spain. Nightmare Alley was our favorite, my dad's and mine. Saw it together on TV. He too had a heart attack at 44. I watched him collapse on the living room floor. Valentine's Day, I was 14, ran down 89th Street yelling for a doctor. I love graveyards. Would walk Mount Auburn Cemetery outside Harvard Square with my old college professor, big wool coats with pockets. Sometimes we could see the moon in the afternoon, but we never saw the stars. I left the cold winters back east, moved to LA, wore a two-piece under my clothes every day. You never knew who might have a pool. A rotting corpse is teeming with life. Maybe Tyrone's bones are still breathing today. Maybe after my father's final heart attack, there was a moment he remembered only the good things, whether or not they ever happened. I used to sunbathe on Tyrone Power's grave when sunbathing was something we still did. Flowers around me, angels in bikinis, smoking cool lights. So you see, my poems mix things that didn't happen with things that did happen. You don't really know what, but one thing, if you ever wanted to try to do what I call automatic writing or fever writing, again, I mentioned it, but you find a prompt, something that interests you, something that sticks out, and you just write. And you don't judge, you don't think about what you're writing, you don't cross it out, you turn on a timer, and you go. And you can do it with handwritten, you do it on the computer, and you'll be surprised what will come out. Even if it's one line, like where did that come from? I teach every Saturday in West Hollywood, and it's for all different people, levels. Some people have never written before, and they walk away just amazed with what does come out. So maybe I will read one more, and then I will... Any dog lovers here? I mean, everyone, who isn't a dog lover? It's sort of like, okay, it's my fallback dog-loving poem. But actually, this is a weird poem. I haven't read it on my little book tour yet. But I used Google for this poem, too, because, well, I'll tell you at the end of it. The poem, the prompt, was a headline. And the headline I read in the paper was Divers Search Lake for Killer's Secrets. Now, I am one of the few people on this earth who still get a hard copy newspaper. Although I'm thinking of stopping because I almost have had enough. But I love, like the old days, I love seeing a headline in a newspaper. It's very evocative to me. So, Divers Search Lake for Killer Secrets is a great prompt. I challenge you all, take my book home. When you see this, write down the title and write your own poem. What will they find? An heirloom watch, rose gold, engraved, "You're the one." A tiny hole where the ruby used to be. And of his, not much. The hammer that may have done their victim in, though maybe it was hers. They killed together, not for money or revenge, for the thrill of surprise. How far would they go? How much could they stand to watch the other do? Risk? Of course. They'd been married a long time. But the lake looked clean and inviting, the divers said. As they immersed themselves in a world of pike and trout, deep down leaves rooted in sediment, no evidence. What did they find? A man who'd been dead for years, his face 2 dark holes where his eyes used to be, not the couple's secret, but someone else's. The lakes under the waves have waves of their own. So that's a weird poem. I mean, I know that. But I will say that the lakes under the waves have waves of their own, I got on Google. Because I read about lakes and what's in a lake, and that was one of the things that Google said was in a lake, that the waves under the lake have waves of their own. And I thought that was beautiful. Because a good poem is about one thing, but it's also about the other thing. And that will make sense when you start to read poetry. So I'm going to end my little portion of this before we chat for a minute. I wanted to bring in something brand new. So this was written this morning, which is, it's not done. But I wanted to show sort of my process Again, I love the headlines. And I was driving yesterday. I listened to KNX radio, and they have the best. I mean, I pull over and just write things down. So there was a woman mauled by a tiger this week. I don't know if anyone... and they brought on... I know, it's terrible. She survived. She'll be okay. Let's not worry about her right now. Or we can. We can. But they brought on a person to get a quote from him, like a spokesperson, and he said, "The tiger did what tigers will do." So thank you. Again, thank you, everyone who gives me poems. So I wrote this morning. I put that in my notebook. This was the other day when I heard it. So I just want to show the process, and comes from nothing, and here we go. So the title of the poem in quotes is "The Tiger Did What Tigers Will Do," said a spokesperson for the Topeka Zoo. After an employee was attacked by a 275-pound Sumatran tiger named Sanjeev. The nameless victim entered the animal's enclosure at about 9:15 a.m. One should never be in the same space as a tiger, they say. Why was she there? Didn't she know? Humans need to keep track of places we should never be. That alley at night on the street without a light, the car filled with people drinking, a church, temple, nightclub. Or being in a room with another person who's upset with himself, the world, his dead parents. This too can be dangerous. They will not euthanize Sanjeev because the 7-year-old male tiger was just being himself, doing what his instincts have taught him. Humans aren't headed for extinction like these tigers, but it's getting pretty crowded in our cages. Humans will do what humans will do, but there are no fun facts about humans written up in Google. Tigers hunt alone. No two tigers have the same stripes. Tigers can go up to 2 weeks without eating, but don't be alone with one of them on day 15. Thank you very much.
We should probably talk into these so that the people on the video can hear us.
Okay.
I'll ask some questions, but if you have questions, you're more than welcome to. I will throw you the microphone, and we can hear. Does anyone have any right now? Okay, I'm going to get started then, but I'm going to throw this to Susanna first, and there we go. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Maybe I could start with something you said about this last poem that you wrote, which is that it's not done yet. So could you talk about what might happen? I know you don't know at this point,
I'd
but
like to ask our studio audience, do you think that poem is finished?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing of it is, when I was reading it, it seemed pretty okay to me. But that's it's a long shot out of the gate right away. I would look at it, and you have the different lenses of poetry to look at. The line breaks, the rhythm, the music, the word choice. These are all things we look at when we're writing. And did I choose the right words? You know, it turned out to be a political poem, which I didn't think it was going to be. But when I had the list of things where we shouldn't be, I realized as I was driving to my office today that I should have temple, church, and nightclub in that list, because that made it the poem I was thinking it might be, which is about you never know what's dangerous anymore. Anyway, so I don't know.
Even though a tiger enclosure seems like an obvious one, but these others are not.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why the poem is about one thing and another. Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of liking that poem the way it is.
Okay, so sometimes it's pretty good right out of the blocks.
Can be.
Yeah.
But this was a poem I wrote for Google, which is why I wrote the Google word in it.
Thank you.
But it's true that I Googled. It's true, and I Googled what makes a tiger, and then I got that about they never have the same stripes, which who knew, right? I mean, you guys really come up with some great stuff. I never knew about the stripes, that they can't have the same stripes, that they hunt alone, I think I knew, but anyway, yeah, so I might keep it as is.
Cool. No? Okay. I thought I saw a hand. I have a friend who is not here, so he's going to hear about that. But
Loser.
I know, right?
Yeah, totally.
We won't say his name.
Don't say it.
But he's gonna when he watches the video, he'll know who he is.
I didn't really think you're a loser.
You are.
Well, you are.
I told him about poetry, and he's a very sort of typical, no, maybe not typical, but he's an engineer, like many of us here, and sort of expressed the idea that he, didn't necessarily know a lot about poetry, but he really enjoyed limericks. And you mentioned that there's poetry for everyone, right? And so that reminded me of this statement that he made, where these are, very structured, very predictable and not predictable, all in the same way, right? Is that what you meant?
That there's poetry for everyone? Yeah, I mean, limericks, we all know what limericks are. There once was a woman from Sweden who blah, blah. So, I mean, it's a comfort, they're comforting because of the rhyme scheme. And they feel good and they sound good and they're fun. They may not have a certain substance that another poem may have, but they're engaging and they're fun, and you can memorize them and you can sing them, and yeah, nothing wrong with a good limerick, I've never written a limerick. I mean, I have as like a joke, but I don't seriously write them. But nothing wrong with them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was thinking was just that there are these multiple levels of poetry. Poets write for different audiences, and it seems.
Well, I think there are different audiences for different poetry. I'm not sure that poets write for different audiences, but I think that one could pick up a book and see what they like. What's very hot right now is flash fiction. They're little tiny stories. And a lot of poems are kind of flash fiction. I mean, my poems are flash fiction. They're moments, they're stories, a lot of times beginning, middle, end, because I write what you would call more narrative poetry. There's a story there, rather than lyric, which is more of an idea or a prayer. But yeah, there's just everything, right?
Before you started, we were chatting, and I mentioned that in various online poetry forums, I see a lot of questions from, I assume, students, but maybe not. It's hard, you never really know. Asking, what's the meaning of this poem? The Raven. Somebody said the Raven earlier as a example poem. What does the Raven mean, or what is this Wordsworth poem mean, or stuff like that. And we were chatting about that and how maybe the idea of looking for meaning in a poem the way that you would in a philosophy text, maybe that's not the right way to think about it.
Yeah, well, it's very off-putting. And I think it turned a lot of people off in class. When we all had to read, stopping by the, whose woods are these? I think I know, his house is in the village. Robert Frost. Did we all have to read that? So then it was like, what does it really mean? And, I would get a stomach ache, because, poetry does not have a right answer and a wrong answer. A good poet will put enough information in that poem, enough feeling, enough emotion, so that the reader gives the poem meaning. If when I'm reading that poem, Shoplifting, if it connects you to a time you shoplifted, or it makes you laugh, or it makes you feel sorry for the poor guard who's talking to himself, if there's enough there, that's the meaning. It's not like another meaning. And You can go level to level. I've been in classes as an adult where we do poems, and a teacher, a poet, will help me understand a poem in a way I did not understand it. And I am so grateful for that. And I've been in classes where I hand out poems and I say, what meanings do you take? And the meanings are amazing. There's a great poem called The Day Lady Died by my favorite poet, Frank O'Hara. And it's about Billie Holiday dying. And the poet, the speaker, sees it on the New York Post that Billie Holiday died. Anyway, I've read that poem hundreds of times, and I know what it means to me. But if you Google The Day Lady Died by Frank O'Hara, you will get pages and articles of what that poem means, what he meant by this, what he meant by that. Now, Frank O'Hara is dead. We can't say, hey, Frank, did you really mean that? But so the reader gives the poem meaning. And the poem is to be enjoyed. And if you can't step into it and enjoy it, go to another poem. You know, it's not a test like math. It's 2 + 2 is 4, but with a poem, there's no such thing as a right answer, in my opinion.
I love that. Does anyone, I'm going to put a question to our audience. Is anyone off-put by the ambiguity of that? Yes. Do you want to say anything about it? No?
So when you're writing a poem, like, do you have certain levels of meaning that you're meaning to convey in this poem and, like, hoping the readers will understand?
Right. That's a great question. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. I don't have an end game when I start to write a poem. There are poems that hit me, that literally come through me. For example, there's a poem in this book called Thirst, and it's a poem about my father, and it's very clearly about my father. There's no ambiguity. And when I was writing it about him. Now, readers will get what they get from it. You know, she loved her father, she didn't love her father enough, but mainly you're going to see yourself in that poem and how you feel about your father. So I don't care what meanings you take from it, as long as you feel something when you read it. Now, there are other poems that are complete surprises to me, like the tiger poem that I wrote this morning. I didn't know where that was going to go. That's a poem about not really being safe anywhere. You know, this poor woman goes into the thing, I don't know who let her do that, and she gets mauled, but there's everyday situations that are dangerous, and we don't know. That's what the poem turned into. But if you don't see that in the poem, you know, that's okay. So the answer is, I don't hope my reader's going to see anything a certain way. But when you're in a workshop, a poetry workshop, which I was in on and off for years and years, the first thing that's asked after you read your poem, everyone has a copy, is what meanings do you take from the poem? And everyone has a chance to say what they see in the poem. And sometimes I'd be like, no, I don't mean that at all. I don't want that, you know. And then I would go home and I'd take it out, or I'd redo it, because there are certain things I really don't. But then, now where I am, I don't care. I really don't. If I'm satisfied with the poem, I just hope that my reader gets something from it. And if they're arguing with someone else, no, she really meant this, no, great.
Thanks.
Does that answer?
Mm-hmm.
So I love this idea that there isn't a meaning, there's meanings.
Yeah.
And it's in some ways it's a collaboration between the poet
Absolutely.
and the reader. Not in some ways, in lots of ways.
You just said it. A poem, the reading is a collaboration between the writer and the reader. Absolutely true. And I would like to not kill, I mean, we're not supposed to say that, but, you know, just like round up every teacher who ever made us give a poem a meaning, you know, or was told we were wrong when we said we thought it meant something. I mean, that is a real serious crime against poetry.
You heard it here, teachers.
It's true, for goodness sake.
A lot of people, speaking of the classroom, a lot of people, I think, are used to reading poetry. It's a really different experience hearing, especially a poet read their own poems. It's just completely different. Can you talk a little bit about the audible aspects of poetry?
Poems should be read aloud. You should read every poem in this book aloud. They're music. They're poems for a reason. The line breaks are there to break the moment, the sound. And to hear a poet, I mean, there's some better readers than other readers. It's another thing. Poets should all learn how to read their poems. But I love reading, and I think that, and I love going to a good reading and hearing a poet. I love read their work. So yeah, poems are musical. They should be read aloud, and it is a different experience to hear them aloud. Definitely.
Do you tend to read along with a poet, like to follow the?
Sometimes, but in writing a poem, and I use my computer for this on my phone, as I'm writing, I read it aloud, and then I listen to the poem, and I will hear what that poem needs.
When you say you listen, do you record yourself reading it?
Yes, I record myself, and then I listen. I'm like, whoa, that is the total wrong sound or the wrong word. You know, if you get into writing poetry, you know, poems are all different forms, so it's like just like a box. A poem is in a box. A poem can have tercets, which is the 3 lines broken by stanzas, or 4 lines. But when you put a poem in couplets, 2, 2, 2, and 2, a teacher once said to me, that's like putting on a bikini. You can see all the things wrong with that poem. I mean, it's hilarious. But so I often will take a poem and I'll put it in couplets, and I'll see the things that are sticking out, like, oh God, that word has to go, or it's cumbersome, or it's bulky. Yeah, so poem is a musical, should be read aloud, should be heard aloud. There's an amazing museum in Chicago, the American Poetry Museum, and you can go into a room and put on headphones and listen to any poet you can imagine who's recorded read their poem. Right, you can hear Robert Frost stopping by the woods, and that's like, whoa. It makes the poem sound so different hearing him read it. So.
We have time for maybe one more question. If there's not one from the audience, I have one final one, but if anyone wants to take, yes, from the far back.
Uh-oh.
I think I know what this is, but that's okay. No? Okay.
So I recently heard Stephen King say that the first time you write something, you should do it with the door closed, and the second time you should do it with the door open. I'm wondering if you could speak to your process of kind of writing, rewriting, editing, if you think it's different for poetry versus other genres.
Well, I love Stephen King's book called On Writing. Is that where that was from? It's a great book, by the way. Great book. And so I can write a poem anywhere, frankly. I've written a lot of my poems in parking lots. I used to leave stores at Target and Loehmann's. I have a poem called Boob Job that takes place in the Loehmann's dressing room. And I was so taken with the idea of writing this poem that I wrote it in the parking lot, and I was sort of getting gassed by the cars as they were starting. So my husband plays guitar, and many poems have been written listening, to him blast music, and there was no place to escape to. I think the ability to write a poem under any circumstances, once it comes to you, you get sort of taken. It's almost like a spirit. It doesn't matter. Now, revising, I need to be in there with the door closed. I need quiet, I need privacy. If I can get it, that is very, and I like to take my poems into bed with me. Once I've written them, they go into bed. I don't know, it's sort of more personal or intimate or something. And then I print them out, and then I use a pencil. I like pencils a lot, and I revise. But I think I've written on the beach. I've written with the door open, with the door closed, in bed, in driving, while I was driving, which is really dangerous to the people driving around me. But yeah, so there you go. I wish I had a more pat answer, but does that help? Is that good? Yeah.
All right, well, we are out of time, so I just would like to encourage everyone to go back to your desk and write a poem. Use some of the techniques that Kim has talked about, and you don't have to show it to anyone, just do it for yourself. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us. I think this has been fascinating. I've really, really enjoyed it, so thank you for coming.
Thank Keith for making this happen. He said we need a poet in here, right? So thank you.
We'll have more. We'll have more poets, and we'll start to,
Great.
We'll have a whole thing. We're going to do a whole poetry thing.
Whole thing. Okay.
Thank you.